What is up, guys? In this video we are going to be writing a very simple C program. The idea around this program is to take as input the total marks obtained by students in a course, and then after obtaining this input we'll display a corresponding letter grade for that particular input. So we have a table here, and then this table has marks and the letter grade. So if the input we receive is between these numbers 80, 100, we'll return A. If it's between 70 and 79, we'll return B, and so on and so forth. So you get the idea. Now let's get to the fun part and write the C program. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a file called cgpa.c, and I am going to define the main function. So this main function is supposed to do certain things. So I'm going to receive, if I can spell correctly, an input, and then I'm going to process this input, and then I'm going to return an output. So instead of doing this single line comments over and over, I could just do a multi-line comment. So I could just select everything. Well, still very funny. So doing it this way, the shortcut didn't work, so I found that funny. Alright, so if you want to write a comment that spans through multiple lines, this is how you do it. For a single line comment, will just be this is a single line comment. Alright, so I know for some of us we haven't worked with C in the past, so I am going to be trying to explain some of these concepts while we're working with them. So the first thing we're going to do is to accept the input from a user. Before we accept that input, we want to interact with this user. We want to ask them to actually enter the input instead of just expecting an input without asking them. So in order to do that, we need to print something to the console. I just need to say enter your score, right? Or enter your score for the course. So whatever, anything you want to have here, we can just have any arbitrary text that works for us. But right now, this printf is part of the standard library, but we don't have the standard library imported, or we don't have it included in the C file. So we'll just have to do add header file. So include, and then with angle brackets, and then we'll do stdio.h, right? So that should allow us to be able to use this function printf. Without including this here, this wouldn't be possible. Header files are just a way to include functionalities that do not exist in our current file into our current file, so we can use them, right? And this is how you include a standard library header file. In order to include your own header file, it would be something like this. Instead of the angle bracket, it would be with strings. So just we're going to have the same thing but with strings, just like this, right? But because it belongs to the C programming language itself, so you use this angle brackets. Just take that as a note in case you want to write your own custom headers. Okay, so we have this. So the next thing to do is to initialize a variable, which is an integer of score, and then would also call scanf. So scanf is what we use to accept an input from the user. So scanf, I'll have a format specifier of an integer here, and then this format specifier of an integer is going to we're just saying that, okay, we're expecting an integer from this user basically, and then whatever we get from this user, we want to assign it to the address of the score variable that we've defined above, right? So we declare the variable of score, which is an integer, and then we've specified here that we want to receive an input using this function from the user, and then this input is supposed to be an integer because of this format specifier of %d. So %d is for integers. We have %f, which is for floating point numbers. We have %c, which is for characters. We have %s, which is for strings, right? So there are different format specifiers depending on the data type that you're working with. But right here we're working with an integer, which is the reason why we've used %d right here. And then this ampersand sign here, this right here, this and sign, and whenever you see this and sign close to a variable, it means that we are referring to the address in memory or the memory location of this variable, not the actual variable name itself. All right, so scanf is going to receive the input, and then we're going to store that input into this variable. So score is now going to be whatever the user is going to enter. So let me just run this, and then let me show you what it's going to look like. So in order to run this, remember C is a compiled language, so we need to compile this code first before running it. So in order to compile it, I'm currently on Mac OS. If you're on Windows, you probably use GCC. So GCC-C program program-c, that's not the name of the file is cgpa.c, and then you do -o, and then the output file name, right? This is optional. You could just leave this, and then it would give you a name for the executable that is going to be generated from this compilation process, right? But then I'm not going to use GCC. I'm going to use clang. So I'm just going to do clang cgpa.c, and that should compile it for me. So now I have this file here, a.out. So and to run that both on Windows and on Mac OS, all you just have to do is to do /a.out. That's the name of the file and the extension, and then just enter. So it's saying right here that I should enter my score for the course. So I'm going to say 70. So what that did was to take the score, which is 70, and then assign it to the address of this variable right here, score. So score would automatically now have a value of 70, right? So in order to figure that out, let's print score. So I want to print, what I want to print is %d score. So I want to print score to the console, and after printing score, I want to escape the new line. Let's see. I'm going to run that again. Compile. Let's see. What am I getting wrong? Did you mean printf? Oh, I did print instead of printf. Of course, printf. Okay, compiled. Okay. Enter your score for the course. So I'm going to enter 70. Right, and it prints 70 as expected. So because now score now has the value of 70 because we assigned it here, right? If we had done this without using the address of score, it wouldn't have worked, because scanf expects the address of the variable you want to assign to and not the variable name itself. So let's see what this guy is going to return for us without the address itself, right? So it returns a warning. Format specifies type int, and this star here, the pointer, but the argument has type int. So one warning was generated. So let's try to run it, to run the out. This was just a warning, so but it's compiled. So let's run the code and see what happens. So running the code is saying enter your score for the course. I'm going to say 20, right? And then it returns this error, 50038 segmentation fault, ./a.out. So this basically there was an issue here because this guy was expecting, this scanf was expecting an address, but then I passed a variable name to it. So please, anytime you're expecting a value from a user and you've declared a variable that you want to store that value into, instead of using the variable name, just use the address of that variable, or the memory location of that variable. And to access or to get the memory location for the variable, all you just have to do is to use the and sign before the variable name. I think that should explain things further. All right, so let's proceed. Now we've done the initial step, which is receive input. So this is done. We're good with this. This is good. Let's just say X done. All right, so now this is in progress. This is in progress. Process the input. Now, in order to process the input, we could do certain things here, but there are ways we could approach this. In fact, let's look at that problem again. Now, we have this marks here, these marks, and then we have these letter grades. We have 80 to 100, we have 70 to 79, we have 60 to 69, we have 50 to 59, we have 0 to 49. What could go wrong looking at this? What could go wrong? So we could have a case where a user would give us a score that is not within these numbers here, 0 to 100. A user could give us 1000 or minus 50. So we need a way to handle those type of numbers, right? So let's do that first. Let's do that first. Or we could proceed to actually do the thing and then sort of like walk through those edge cases and then fix them. Okay, so I think that's what we should do. So instead of first of all solving the base case or the edge cases, let's actually solve the problem and then approach it approach the edge cases while we encounter them. Okay, so what I'm going to do here now is that I am going to I'm going to write something called conditionals. So conditionals basically mean if else statements, right? So we're going to ask some questions, and depending on the value, we're going to make some decisions, right? So we're going to say, is this true? Or if this is between this and that, then do this. Those kind of statements are called conditionals, right? So now let's think about this problem again, right? So we want to say that, let's look at the table again. So we want to say that if a score is equal to 80 or greater than 80, and that score is equal to 100 or less than 100. So we are confining. So for this first one here, we are saying the score should be greater than or equal to 80, right? And we are also saying that this guy, the score, so I'm talking about from 80 to 100. So from 80 to 100. Now this is where your problem, this is where the problem solving skill is now required, right? Because we have to think through this and say, okay, what defines 80 to 100? What defines this range? So what defines this range? Using our, so these are comparison operators. Basically, we are comparing numbers, right? If I'm not wrong about the name, but in maths, we call these inequalities. So they are comparison operators. So now we are saying that 80 to 100 is defined as any number, right? So let's say this is a number, any number that is greater than or equal to 80, and that same number, right, is less than or equal to 100. Now this perfectly defines 80 to 100. This perfectly defines 80 to 100. Think about it. So if I have a number and that number is greater than or equal to 80, it means that, okay, this number could be greater than 80 or it could be 80, and that same number is less than or equal to 100. So it means that the number is less than. So any number that starts from 80 and ends at 100, if the number should be in that range, it would conform to this statement here. Think about it for a minute. So a number is greater than or equal to 80, and the number is less than or equal to 100. So what are the numbers that fall within this range? So we have 80, we have 81, we have 82, we have 83, we have 84, all the way to 100, right? So this is the first expression we are going to use in order to check for the validity of the letter grade A. Now for the validity of the letter grade B, what we have to do is to say any number that is greater than or equal to 70 and the number is less than 80. Now think about this for a minute. Does it make sense? 70 to 80. So no, this is 70 to 79 rather. 70 to 79 from our table. Remember, 70 to 79. So I'm saying any number that is greater than or equal to 70, right? It means that the number can be greater than 70, or the number could be 70 and the number is less than 80. This means that the number cannot be 80, it can be 79. Okay, that's the upper bound, right? And then the lower bound is 70, meaning that, okay, we have 70 here, and the number could be equal to 70 or greater than 70, basically. So I'll just rush through the other ones. So for 60 to 69, it's still the same thing. We're going to follow the same step. So the number should be greater than or equal to 60, and the number should be less than, so this is 60 to 69, should be less than 70, right? So, and this should conform to the range of 60 to 69. Awesome. Now the next one is quite straightforward as well. We're going to say that the number is greater than or equal to 50 and the number is less than, guess, what should it be? It should be less than 60, right? And then we should say that it should conform to 50 to 59. All right. And we are going to do something right now. But before we do what I want us to do, I want you to think about this. Just look at this and be sure that this makes sense to you. So these symbols here do not mean anything in C. I'm just using this to say, okay, like this is the response, right? This is the actual range rather. So it doesn't mean anything in C. Do not be confused, okay? Don't let it confuse you. I'm just going to put some spaces here just to make sure that we're not being confused by these symbols, okay? All right. So instead of saying for the 0 to 49, right? So 0 to 49, instead of saying num is greater than or equal to 0 and num is less than 50, right? This would be valid. This would be valid for, just paste this here and use this as a template for what I want to do, 50. This would be valid for the given range of 0 to 49, rather 0 to 49, my bad, 49. Yeah, this would be valid for the range 0 to 49. But we could use this as, we could look at it at, so in the if else paradigm, right, there is something that usually happens. So once we've checked different expressions and they don't turn out to be truthy, we could then fall back to one generic default that is going to be executed if none of these actually match, right? So instead of doing num is greater than or equal to 0 and num is less than 50, we could just say if this, right, we could return this. We could say it's A, else if this, say B, else if this, C, else if this, D, else. We then just say that, okay, it is F. So instead of checking this could just be the else block. So let me do, so instead of doing all of this right here, this is going to make sense when we get to the code. So instead of doing this right here, we just say else, and then we just take this as the actual range, since it did not fall within any of these, right? But then because of the edge case that I mentioned previously, this could be problematic, and we're going to see it in action. Okay, I just want you to take note of this. Just keep this in front of your mind, and I hope we get to it. I'll make mention of it. It's a very important thing to remember. Okay, so let's get back to our code. So I am going to bring this over. I'm going to bring everything here over to where we have our comments. Okay, so in fact we're going to have another comment here. So a multi-line comment, remember, starts with this and ends with this. So we have slash star, so forward slash star, and then star forward slash, star forward slash, and then we have the comments inside of that. Okay, so now I am going to indent this properly so that we can see what's going on and make sense of it. Okay, now we received the value from the user, which is the score, and right now what we want to do is to actually run these conditions and return the actual grade depending on the range that the score falls within. Okay, so now what we're going to do now is that we're going to say if, in brackets, if num, so this right here, so I'll type it, if num is greater than, I could just copy and paste, is greater than or equal to 80, right? Now we can't say num, okay, so because we don't have num defined, that's why it's screaming at me. Okay, so but we have score defined, so we're going to use score instead. So I'm going to say if score is greater than or equal to 80, and we can't use this because this is not a valid C syntax, so we're going to say, so the valid syntax for and is double ampersand. We're going to say and score is less than or equal to 100. So if this is the case, we are going to return, A. Else if, we could write this on a different line, or we could write it just immediately just after this curly braces, but I prefer to separate things. In fact, I prefer to have my curly brace just starts immediately on the same line with the if statement. It depends on how you want to format things and how you want to read things, but most of the C programs that I've seen, most of them just bring their curly braces down here, but I prefer to just have it right here after this this statement, this expression here. So else if, another expression here. So else if score, remember this is the second one. Else, in fact, let's just copy this to save time. Let's copy this to save time. Else if score is greater than or equal to 70 and score is less than 80, right? If this is the case, we return B. Be sure to use single quotes for the characters, right? Use single quotes instead of double quotes to avoid errors in your code, right? Okay. Else if, let's copy this and then just update the values. Else if score, so we have 60 here, is greater than or equal to 60 and score is less than 70. So we're trying to save time, which is why I'm copying and pasting. We'll just return C. Then we could just copy this else if and paste it down here, and then score, if score is greater than or equal to 50 and score is less than 60, then it falls within the 50 to 59. So this is going to be between 50 to 59 because it's less than 60. Remember what we discussed when we were talking about this. Now, remember when I said we can just use else here instead of doing another else if? Now let me show you what I meant. So instead of doing else if score is greater than or equal to 0 right here and score is less than 50, instead of doing this and then, so this is supposed to be D, let's correct that first, and then this is supposed to be F, and then just return. Instead of doing this, right, there's really no need to do this because this is the last one. This is the last check that we're supposed to do, right? This would work, but it's just not ideal because why are we checking for this case since there's nothing else to check for? Okay. Now, so what we just have to do is to say else, right? Else, just return F. Now, we are going to run this code to see what will happen. Actually, this is going to return an error if we run this code. I'll show you something. I'll show you. Let's compile it and see what will happen. Let's compile it. Let's learn from the errors that we're getting. So I'm going to say clang cgpa.c. Okay, it's compiled, but when I run a.out, it will ask me for my score. I'll say my score is 50. It does nothing. Okay, why did it do nothing? Why did it do nothing? Why did it do nothing? Think about that for a minute. So we received the score and then we checked for the scores and then we returned the actual values or the actual letter grades for those scores, but it did not say anything. So that means we are missing out something very crucial. So a return statement is supposed to be in a function, but this is in a function and the name of the function is main, and main is not supposed to return this right here. Remember, the main is returning an integer, right? And the main function is expected to return 0 or 1. So 1 meaning that this operation happened successfully, and 0 meaning that this operation did not was not successful, right? So that's some C programming thing to worry about. But instead of worrying about that, let's just wrap what we've written so far in a function so that we are sure that we are actually returning these values to a variable and then printing out that variable. So that will make sense once we do it. So let's just go ahead and do it. So in place of all of these things that I have here, right, I am going to copy everything that I have here. Everything that I have here, I'll copy it. I'll just do X, right? So I'll cut it rather. And I'm going to say I'm expecting a character, and that character is going to be grade, the grade. And I'm going to say, okay, this grade is going to be gotten from, it's going to be received from a function named getGrade, right? And then this getGrade is going to take the score. Remember, we have a score initialized or declared here, and then we receive this score from the user. So we are passing this score into this grade function. Remember what a function does? A function just takes an input and then returns an output, or returns a response, or some form of output, right? So have f of x returns an output. So this function is getGrade, takes an input score, and then it would process this score right here, which is what we which is basically what we did here, or the if and else statements we wrote, and then it's just take that and return an output, right? Depending on where the score lands in the ranges that we have specified here, or in the conditions that we've written in our function. Okay, now let's just go ahead and write this function code, which is getGrade. So we're going to go to the top of the file outside of the main function. So we're going to write another function outside of the main function, and we're going to this function is going to return a character. I'm going to call this function getGrade. Remember that we call it getGrade, and it receives a score, right? And then inside of this getGrade function, we're just going to paste our code that we wrote previously. So getGrade is going to take a score, and it's going to check if the score is greater than or equal to 80 and the score is less than or equal to 100 to return, this letter grade A. If it falls within this range, returns B. If it falls within this range, returns C. If it falls within this range, returns D. And if it does not fall within any of these specified ranges from here to here, it's just going to return F, right? If the person did not get 100 and the person did not get from 100 all the way to 50, right? It means that the person got 49 or any other number, and we just want to fail the person. So if the person did not get any number from 50 to 100, we just want to say, oh, this person failed. Now let's run this. So this is a function, getGrade, all right, takes score, returns character, which is it returns a character here, and then we are passing this function here, we're calling it here, and then we are returning the response of this function, which is a character, as grade, as the grade variable. So the next thing we're supposed to do is to print out this actual grade to the user, so the user can see it. So we're going to say print f, I'll say your CGPA is, so I don't know, is CGPA measured in letter grades or numbers? So let's figure that out. I need to be sure that CGPA is measured in, let me check. Is CGPA a letter grade? Cumulative GPA. Okay. It's supposed to be numeric, but then the numeric value has a representation, like a letter representation, which is basically what we're doing. So if it's within any numeric range, we'll just return the corresponding letter grade. So instead of saying CGPA, we'll just say your letter grade is, so this would make more sense to represent it this way, to make more sense to represent it this way. So we just come here and say %C for a character, right? And then after printing this, we just give a new line, right? Return the carriage. All right, so your letter grade is grade. Okay. All right, so let's walk through what we're doing again. So I'm going to remove this so we can see what we're doing clearly. So receive inputs, let's copy this. Receive inputs, so this is what we're doing here. Receive inputs, process the inputs. We're going to process the inputs, which is what we're doing here, right? Let's also comment or add this comment right here. Processing the inputs. So what we're doing here with this getGrade. and then return an output. So for this one, we're basically returning an output everywhere here, depending on the range it falls in. But then let's just call this, let's say this should be the returning an output, or printing the output, so the user can see it. All right, so let's run this and see what is going to happen. So I'm also going to make this code available on GitHub so that we can interact with it. So I'm going to remove these comments here. Okay, so let's compile and run the code again and see what happens. So I'm going to do this. So its parameter score was not declared default to int. Okay, so apparently we did not type the parameter. I'll show you what that means. I will show you what that means. So you know we have int score here, and then we defined a function here called getGrade. But then when we're defining this function, we didn't define the parameter for this function and as an integer, right? So but it implicitly took right here. So from the error message we got, it implicitly took the int data type, you know, as its type, right? But then let's explicitly tell it that it's an integer and see what happens. Perhaps it's going to return a different type of error, or it's going to pass. It's part of the learning. So let's run it again. Well, it's compiled, and then /a.out, enter your score for the course. So I'm going to say 100. I got 100. Your letter grade is A. Okay, so let's try the different ranges and see. So this is 100. So let's try for 70. Let's try 70. B is 70 B. Let's confirm. So 70, 79 B. Okay. Let's try 79 and 80. In fact, let's try 60. Let's try all the bands, all the lower bands. So let's say 70. That's 70. So let's do. Did we do 80? We didn't do 80. I did the upper bound. 80. Letter grade is A. Makes sense. Let's run it again. Let's go for the course. Say 50 or 60 rather. C is 50C. 50. Oh, let's say 50 or 60. 60. Okay, that's correct. So let's do 50 now. 50 D. Okay, so let's do 0. Yeah, letter grade is F. Now, so we have a working code currently. So what we have here is currently working. This works for us. This makes sense. But there is a problem somewhere. Now think about this. We have a document right here. We have a table, and then on this table we have the num range to be from 0 to 100. But some users, because you can't predict your users, some people could just put 1000 or minus 50 or minus 100. What would happen in that case? So let's try. Let's see what's going to happen if a radical user just comes and says their score was 2000 over 100. What would happen? That means they failed. Because the person got minus. They failed, right? So we need to have a way to communicate to these users that, hey, this is outside of the values that we are expecting for a valid score, right? So how do we do that? So before processing the inputs, let's do some input validation. So right here we're going to say validate inputs, right? And in order to validate the inputs, it's very easy, right? So we're just going to say if so it's similar to what we did before. So we're going to say if score is less than 0, that means the score is not 0. Or how you do or is with the double pipe. So just do pipe 1 and pipe 2. Or if this score you're giving me is less than 0, or this score you're giving me, right, is greater than 100, I need to do something about it. I'm going to scream that, hey, this is an invalid, or I'm going to say value error, please enter a valid score. Okay, and please enter a valid score. Or instead of saying please enter a valid score, I'm going to say value error. I'm going to say valid scores are between 0 to between 0 and 100. Okay, that's the best. That's this is a better way to communicate it to the user so that they know what to do instead of just trying arbitrary values. Okay, now this is an if statement, so I'm saying if this happens, do this. I could just continue and this will still work, right? I could just run this code and it will still work. So let's run it. Let's compile it and run it. But I wanted to add one more thing. But let's build on top of things. Okay, so I've compiled and I'm running. Okay, I'm saying 0. Let's say minus 10. Now value error. Valid scores are between 0 and 100. But it still went ahead to say that your letter grade is F. So what happened? What happened? Remember, after doing this, after validating the input, we still went ahead to do this, to grab the score for that input or the grade for the input, and then also we printed the letter grade. We printed this this output to the user, right? So the way to handle this is to use the else statement. So if this is the case, right? If this is the case, rather, if this here is the case, do this. But else, right? I'm going to say else. In an else block, I'm then going to do all of this. So it's like saying if this is true, do this. But if it is not true, do this. But without the else, it will say if this is true, do this. Regardless, even if it's true or it's false. Just so this is what I'm saying. What we had previously without the else is if this is true, do this. If it is not true, don't do this. But there's an additional layer to it, because if this is true, we should do this and also go ahead to do this, because there's no else block, right? But then if this is false, it won't do this, but it will still do this, right? So in order to catch this, what we have to do is to just come here and say else, right? Else. So if this is true, do this, right? Else. That means else means if this is false, do only this one, but don't do this one. Okay, so that's what it means. So I'm just going to copy or cut this here and paste it inside of the else block. Okay, paste it inside of the else block, and we should be good to go now. So let's compile again and run the code. So I've compiled, it's compiled successfully, and I'm running again. So I'm saying okay, this time around, say 2000 again. Yeah, so value error, valid scores are between 0 and 100. Let's do something that is below that is less than 0. So enter your score for the course. I'm going to say -1. Value error, valid scores are between 0 and 100. Okay, now if the person read the error message, so they would understand that, okay, I must put something that is between 0 and 100. So I'm going to say, okay, I got 0 and the letter grade is F, or I got 70. Oh, the letter grade is B. Yeah, so I am going to, so this is basically what the assignment is all about. So what we did was to define this main function, and then inside of the main function we received an input, validated the input, and then processed the input, right, and then returned an output to the user. And then we wrote this function here to help us in processing the input, and then we included this standard IO header file in order to use things like the scanf and the printf. All right, that will be all for this video. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. You could actually, these videos are not listed, they're not listed, so not everyone on YouTube would see it, just people with the link. But you could also like it and follow my channel if you want to. And if you want me to make this more of this type of videos, also let me know. I'm just making these videos for my group members only, but I've seen that it's also going out into other groups as well. But if you're interested in seeing more of this type of videos, please do let me know. I'll make more of this type of content, or I'll probably just take it seriously. All right, see you in the next one, guys. Bye for now.